I assumed we would merely watch a movie that evening, like we usually did, but I didn't realize it would be the night that our relationship took a drastic turn, when I should have pushed my brother away when he kissed me. But instead, I allowed it to happen. And perhaps I had been anticipating it in my heart. Mike and I have shared a room for as long as I grew up, with glow-in-the-dark stars and bunk beds for as long as I can remember. The ceiling whispers in the middle of the night about monsters beneath the bed and who would prevail. When we grew older, Batman or Spider-Man engaged in combat, and the bunks were changed by two twin beds on either side of the room. Yet despite all of this for years, nothing about it seemed strange. But recently, I'm not sure when things began to shift between us. Perhaps last summer I realized that he no longer referred to me as a child, and began referring to me as a pretty boy instead. Or perhaps it was the way he now looks at me, like a brother, but the air felt like something else, something terrible, distinct when he entered a room, as if it were more electrified. Mike had the ability to say something extremely improper and get away with it, since he was a bit of a flirt, because he would then wink or giggle, leaving you wondering if he was being serious. He did that with I agree, but his mocking has recently stopped seeming like harmless fun, and something else entirely. Tonight was one of those evenings. With the exception of the software, the house was quiet at this late hour. Of the above-ceiling fan, Mike and I were laying on our parents' bed a few hours earlier. The moonlight is leaking in through the painted curtains, but the bed lights are off, his silky silver outline. We had been discussing girls' music and other irrelevant topics. Stupid TikTok. I sensed his eyes before I saw them as he abruptly stopped talking. He then asked, "Want to practice kissing?" with that recognizable smile in his voice. And I turned my head, blinking in the dark. What girls adore that calm, soft thing? He kept his arms outstretched. Over his head, you need to practice simply saying "I" if you want to become proficient at it. Laughed, but it sounded too loud. "You're such a moron. I'm just staring." He mocked, "Out for you, pretty boy. Unless you're afraid I might surpass you." He laughed as if it didn't matter, but I was obviously unable to see his face. Determine whether he was kidding. My throat felt dry. "Dude, you're messed up," he snorted. "Calm down." I'm joking, but I wasn't at all at ease. My chest felt constricted, and my hands were sweating, and I became acutely conscious of his body's shape in the moonlight, including the way his jaw was slashed. I turned onto my side, away from him, and his shirt clung to his chest. "Good night, Mike," he remarked nonchalantly. "Night." Yet the quiet that ensued wasn't informal. It was heavy and thick. I gazed at the wall, attempting to place my ideas into something different. Anything else that my mind kept returning to his voice, the way he spoke, and the thought of his lips near mine. His slow, warm breath practice made me despise myself for even considering it. Heat pulled low in my body, seemingly unconcerned that Mike was my brother. Stomach, and I tried to ignore the thoughts by biting the inside of my cheek. He had always called me that and teased me like that, so he was really just playing around. Pretty joked about how all my friends had crushes on me. Once even said I had a model pout when I got annoyed. It was just how he was. He liked pushing buttons. But this felt different, like he was pushing a button he wasn't supposed to know existed. I heard him shift in his bed a soft sigh. Then nothing. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would drown out the thoughts, but it didn't. If anything, it made them worse. I recalled each time he referred to me as beautiful, ran their hands through my hair, or embraced me for a bit too long. When we wrestled, the way his hands gripped my shoulders always caused my skin to buzz in a way that shouldn't have happened to my face. I pushed the blanket off because it was too hot, and I was too conscious of everything. What if he wasn't kidding? That was the thought that wouldn't go away. It rooted itself in my chest and curled around my ribs like a vine. What if he'd meant it and then panicked? What if he was feeling the same confusion I was, or worse? What if he knew exactly what he was doing? I hated how much I wanted to know the answer. The minutes lingered. The silence stretched. I assumed he'd fallen asleep. But suddenly, "Are you still awake?" Mike's voice cut softly through the dark. My heart jumped. "Yeah. You okay?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just thinking a beat of silence about earlier." I swallowed. "It was just a joke, right?" Another pause. He let out a breath. "Yeah, man. Just messing with you." He didn't say anything else, and neither did I. But I didn't believe him, because his voice had trembled just a little when he said it. Because his breathing wasn't steady. Because I could feel his eyes on me again. And because deep down, I wanted it not to be a joke. I shifted onto my back and stared up at the ceiling. The fan kept whirling. Casting S had shadows throughout the room like slow-moving ghosts. Confusion, guilt, and something I didn't want to mention made my chest hurt. Ought to have called him obscene and hurled a pillow at him as I usually did and laughed with him, but I didn't just lay there still as stone, wondering what it meant that the thought of kissing my brother wouldn't leave me alone. And worse, wondering what I would have done if he hadn't taken it back. But I couldn't stop wondering, what if he wasn't kidding? 22222? Mike had always made fun of me. I was the younger one, so it was sort of his thing. Sensitive one, the one who used to cry when he scared me with ghost stories. He used to poke fun at how I walked, how I dressed, even how I ate cereal like I was worried the spoon might bite me. But that was the point. It always felt harmless. Though his taunting felt different lately, it wasn't the same as his usual brotherly behavior. Usual stuff. It was more sharp, like when I stepped into the kitchen that morning and he raised his eyebrows, slowly, lips twisting into that smug smirk. "Damn," he whispered, taking a sip. I glanced at him as he said, "You get hotter while I sleep or something?" From his coffee. Puzzled. "What?" He shrugged carelessly, eyes still on me. "You simply look good. That's all. Didn't expect you to grow into that look." I rolled my eyes and attempted to laugh it off, but I felt the heat build up my neck. Nevertheless, I looked toward the fridge to hide it. "Ah," he murmured in a slightly too soft voice behind me. "You're blushing again." I pulled out the milk, squeezing the carton more than I needed to shut up. "I'm just saying it's kind of cute." I was unable to respond because my face felt flushed and my heart was pounding too hard in my chest. Like it was on fire, I put cereal into a bowl, focusing on the clinking sound, rather than Mike continuing to stare at me as if I were something he wanted to dissect to find what was inside. And because I didn't detest it after, perhaps that was the worst part. Dad had instructed us to clear out the garage that day, so we ended ourselves outside, which largely meant that I carried the lighter items and avoided staring at Mike whenever he lifted his, while he did half the effort. Shirt to remove perspiration from his brow. His arms were more tanned than I had recalled. He had been exercising and his muscles were more pronounced. At one point, he climbed up the ladder to access a few boxes and instructed me to keep it steady so I wouldn't. "Yes," he called down, but I was preoccupied with my ass. I chuckled awkwardly and looked around. "Otherwise, I wouldn't blame you for being such a loser," he continued. "It's a fantastic," I moaned. "Oh my God, Mike," as he wiggled his ass for emphasis. He laughed aloud and brightened. I experienced a tummy twist that wasn't bothersome or shame, something more sinister, something I didn't want to mention. When we were finished, we passed out in the middle of the day. Both of them were shirtless and worn out. A movie was playing in the backdrop, but I wasn't paying any attention because I knew how close we were. His bare shoulder was only a few inches away from us as our knees continued to brush against the couch. "Oops," he said, extending his arms over his head and grazing my cheek with his bicep. "Didn't mean to flex on you like that." "You're such a slacker," he remarked. I muttered, "You like it, Dick?" And he responded, pausing before adding, You realize I'm simply playing a practical joke on you?" I nodded, but I didn't think he was telling the truth. But why did he keep staring at me that way if it was only a game? Why did he constantly manage to make contact with me, no matter how slight or brief? I tossed and turned linens tangling over my legs all night, unable to fall asleep again. My mind nodded as I continued to recall the sound of his voice, as though he wasn't merely making fun of the way his fingers moved when he said, "You're cute." I was going crazy because he had hung onto my wrist earlier when I gave him a screwdriver, as if he didn't want to let go. I got up to get water after 1 a.m., and since it was dark in the hallway, I walked past Mike's room in silence so as not to wake anyone, and then I said, "Hey, I was surprised by his quiet, low voice when I turned to see him standing in his doorway. A pair of boxers hung low on his hips, shirtless, and his hair was disheveled. The hallway light created shadows on his chest. "Are you okay?" he said. "Yeah," and I answered too quickly. "Just water." He nodded. Putting aside, "Will you please come in for a moment?" After hesitating, I foolishly entered. Shut the door after me. The room smelt clean and somewhat musky, like shampoo and perspiration. "What's up?" Something I'd never be able to name, I inquired, attempting to maintain my voice light. He threw himself onto the bed and tapped the area next to him, saying, "Sit. I sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling as though it may catch fire, because I was bored. Arms behind his head, leaning back against the pillow. "You've been acting strangely lately." I stared at him. "I have?" He nodded. "Yeah, like you're terrified of me or anything." "I'm not. You shudder when I touch you." Now, I looked down at my hands. "No, I don't. You do." A silence stretched between us, lengthy and uneasy. Then quietly, he whispered, Do you recall the night of where?" "Yes. I didn't mean to frighten you." "Of course I did." He claimed that I was merely playing about as usual, and I nodded, not believing but he also said, "Sit up a little. If I hadn't taken it back, what would you—" My breath seized as I stared at him in awe. I don't know what I whispered. He stared at me for a second, then he stretched out and touched my face. Just his fingertips tracing lightly along he said, "You're blushing again." And I swallowed hard. "Stop. Mike, I just want to know he did it." His fingertips traced the edge of my t-shirt down to my collarbone. "Tell me to stop and I will," he growled in a gruff voice. I opened my mouth and closed it. I was unable to speak once more as he moved in to kiss me so closely that I could feel the heat of his skin. Yet he didn't proceed. He only stared at me, waiting, and I abruptly stood up, chest tight. "Two must go." He blinked. "All right." I turned and walked out of the room without daring to glance. I didn't sleep that night either, but it wasn't because I wasn't trusting myself. I was afraid because I wanted to return, and I knew that his touch was still burning my skin. We were both playing with fire, and I wasn't sure why. It wasn't simply teasing anymore. Who would be burned first? But I thought that would be the case. And it had only just begun, and the tension had only grown thicker like smoke, flooding your lungs each time you attempted to breathe. Even though you couldn't see, everything between us had changed since that evening in Mike's room. Some new, uncharted region, but we didn't discuss it or explain how his fingertips had touched my collarbone, how closely he had leaned in, or how I ran away as if the room were about to collapse. Yet it was there in the quiet, in the states where my body would remain a bit too long react before my brain had a chance to catch up. Everything began on a Saturday, to unravel. It was the type of afternoon when the sky was grey and threatened to rain. That caused the entire home to feel quiet and drowsy. Our parents had left to visit relatives an hour away, and Mike and I wouldn't return till late. We're alone ourselves, and the silence made everything seem louder than it should have. So I stayed. Spent the majority of the day hiding in my room with headphones, attempting to lose myself in every time a door or a floorboard creaked. Music didn't help either. Opening in the home, my stomach instinctively knotted, fearing it might. When the storm arrived, it was about 5 o'clock. Thunder shattered the sky, as the rain quickly fell, hitting the windows as if it were attempting to enter. Mike was standing when I came out into the hallway and began massaging the back of my neck, sipping a glass of juice while shirtless close to the kitchen, as if nothing were wrong. His eyes flicked up to meet mine as he murmured, "Power's probably going to cut out." I silently nodded, and he cocked his head as if he was observing me. "Storm's intense." I lied. "Are you avoiding me?" he said, "hiding in your room all day because he was exhausted." Inquired with a slight smile, and I detested the fact that my chest continued to feel constricted. "Number?" he asked as he moved in, his bare feet moving silently against the wood floor. "Liar!" He reached past me, but I remained motionless. His arm encircling mine, he reached for a candle on the shelf and said, "You smell like my shampoo," he muttered. "It's yours." And I could hardly hear him. He simply grinned and lit the candle, which created gentle shadows on his face for a moment. He started to leave the kitchen, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. "Come on, you're not intending to spend the entire night in your room." But I followed him without understanding how we got to the living room. The candle perched on the coffee table, watching the lights above us flicker before going out entirely. The room became quiet. Mike was splayed out on the couch, and I was sitting on the edge of the couch, except for the odd rumble of thunder outside. Armchair. Trying not to look at him while the candlelight danced. "You're quiet," he whispered over the lines of his body. "So are you." He cocked. My throat constricted as he thought about you. Why did Mike look into my eyes? Something unintelligible behind them, since I'm not sure if you despise me or if you're afraid of his lack of response. He simply stood and moved to where I remained motionless as he sat staring down at me with the same unreadable face. "You could have told me to stop," he murmured softly as he reached over and placed a hand on the armrest next to my head. "At night you didn't, so I got up and left, but not because you didn't want me to." "You don't know what I want," he said, abruptly moving past him. He followed. My chest was rising and falling as I swung to face him. "Why are you doing this, Hiz? I no longer want to lie. Not to you, not to anybody else." So I lowered my voice and fixed my eyes on mine. He took another step, and I felt my heart race in my ears. "You're my brother. Forward, wah." I am aware that he carefully reached out and touched my fingertips, but I didn't. I was unable to draw away since my body was both trembling and motionless. "I don't cake now," he muttered. "Like it didn't know how to be you're shaking." I breathed, and he stepped closer. "Let me show you." And then he kissed me. It was slow, gentle, and tentative, just like he was, allowing me time to reconsider, but I was unable to do so. My hand found his chest and remained there, feeling his heartbeat echoing without pushing him back. Against my hand, and as he withdrew, his gaze swept across mine. "Say something too," I stumbled. "I'm not sure what to say." And he half smiled and said, "That's okay." Our silence had grown louder and was now taut as a wire. He took my, "Come here," he murmured, and I followed his legs as he led me to the corridor. Unsteady, we went past the loo to our parents' room before stopping. In he turned to face me in front of his bedroom door, and I said, "You don't have to come in." He opened the door and entered, and I followed him. Nothing, just nodded, shut it after us. The wavering golden light from the candle in his room. He had posters and old pictures of us all over his desk, bed, and walls. He sat on the bed and watched me as I stood awkwardly in the center of the room when we were youngsters. "You okay?" he inquired. He stretched out, and I let him know that I nodded before shaking my head and saying, "Number, I don't know." He drew me in, and I stood between his legs with his hands on my hips. I shuddered when his thumbs touched the edge of my shirt. "We can stop any time," he said, "Okay." I nodded, but I didn't stop him when he stroked his warm, rough hands up my sides when I lifted my shirt, but I didn't stop him. And cautious didn't stop him from kissing my jaw, neck, and chest. I closed my eyes more slowly than before, as if he were teaching me everything one piece at a time. Eyes allowed it to occur, allowing me to sense that this was incorrect. But there, everything else vanished as he touched me. There was only heat and breath, No shame or remorse. He placed me on his bed and comforted me by hovering over me. Our lips touched deeper this time, and instead of crushing, I gave him a kiss in return. Without. The storm outside grew louder as I thought about running my fingers through his hair. We lay there, time fading, echoing our own storm inside the chamber. We were breathing more slowly side by side, and our hands were still clasped together, as if neither of us wanted to release them. Mike fell asleep first, but neither of us really slept that night. His chest slowly rose and fell next to me, with one arm still draped across my stomach. I spent what seemed like hours staring at the ceiling in an attempt to comprehend what had just occurred. This was no longer only a kiss. This was no longer taunting, wasn't a joke. We had gone too far, and I wasn't sure what would happen next. As the storm subsided into silence, the home moaned softly. His chamber smelt like flesh, candle wax, and something I couldn't identify but knew I would always remember. Mike didn't move when I eventually got out of bed and stood at the door for a while, staring back at him, then softly shutting it behind me and leaving. Returning to my room, but instead of lying down, I simply stood there and gazed at my own. I was unsure of who I was and what we had just done when I saw my image in the dark mirror opposite from the bed. Completed, but I was aware that there was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. There was yet more to come. The following morning wasn't light. Instead, I woke up to a quiet that shouted uncertainty rather than peace. My legs were tangled in my own bed linens, and my flesh was still spotted with I could still feel the warmth of his hands and his lips as he breathed on my neck. Hung on after every kiss, as if he were requesting permission each time, and I continued to give it. I had no idea what time it was. The storm had moved on. Behind a dishwater-colored sky with a slight chill that made everything seem heavier. I sat up slowly because I was afraid that any quick movement down the corridor would cause me to unravel. Heard only the occasional trickle of the elderly, no conversations or footfall. As I settled into my room, no longer knocked, as if we were strangers once more. No, we were strangers who divulged a secret I would spend hours lying in bed, reliving every second of that night, wondering if I was the only one who felt it or if I had just imagined it all, whether Mike had simply exploited me for solace or curiosity for any reason. By the 7th day, something in him had been broken and he was unable to face daylight. When I discovered him in the garage, elbows deep in a toolbox, acting like his music was playing quietly through one headphone, but it didn't cover up the fact that I was standing there. He didn't look up, so it's not a good sign. There was tension in the room. We need to talk. No, I shouted louder. This is the only time this week that you have avoided me. Using more force than was necessary, I put down the wrench and turned around, face blank. What do you want me to say? Stop acting as though I don't. Exist, I said. I didn't care that my voice cracked. I just wanted you to stop acting. Mike looked away, jaw clenched, as if that night had never happened. It was an error. He nodded once, but the words were more forceful than a slap. Weakness. I made a step closer, but we got caught up. Was it, or I laughed sourly? God, because you're afraid of what it signifies that he didn't respond. I'm not a coward, you're such one, he said abruptly, looking directly into my eyes. Although the voice was sharp, there was something behind it that was definitely breaking you. I responded in a trembling voice, hell or acting like one. You have no right to drag me into your bed. Tell me you love me. And then, like it was nothing that I was nothing. He looked like he wanted to yell or cry or both, but all he did was clench his fists and shake his head, like the words inside him didn't know how to come out. I don't know what's wrong with me, he replied finally. I've been trying to figure it out for years. There's nothing wrong with you, I said. He took a deep breath and dropped onto the surface, saying, There's nothing wrong with me either. I observed him for a while as he buried his face in his hands on an old seat against the wall. Lengthy minute wondering whether to go to him or walk away for good. I've loved you for so long, he murmured into his hands the words barely audible. Not like a, I used to believe it would go away if I did not, but brother shouldn't be the way others anticipate disregarded it, thinking I would get over it. But as you grew older, it only got worse. My eyes ached with tears, so why push me away? It's wrong, he muttered, looking up, eyes crimson. Because if I let me keep loving you like this, I'll ruin you. You didn't destroy me, I muttered. For the first time in my life, you made me feel wanted. My life? I didn't feel broken. He blinked fast, like he couldn't believe what he was listening. I took a gradual step forward until I was directly in front of him. I don't know what this is, I said, voice quiet, but steady. But I can't keep pretending it didn't happen. I won't. He gazed up at me, anguish engraved into every line of his face. What do we do then? I don't know, I said, honestly, but I don't. He hesitated before reaching out and gently taking you, because he didn't want to lose you like this. I held his hand for a minute, still unsure, until he stood and drew me into his arms. This time, there was only warmth and no fire or haste. When he kissed me again, it wasn't lust. It wasn't longing for two lads who had exhausted all other options to ignore what was already there. A revolt. It was kind and cautious, as if he was learning how I felt, just in. We stood there in the midst of the dusty garage with our arms wrapped around one another in case he never had another chance. Perhaps the rest of the world didn't exist, at least not for us. When we finally separated, he put his forehead to mine and closed his eyes. We can't go back, he muttered, said, we probably need time-space to figure this out. But he nodded slowly. Okay, I said. However, I'm not running, he added in a whisper, and I felt my tightening of the throat. Whatever this is, it's ours. Yes, he claimed it was ours, but we didn't say much later. There was only a silent comprehension that there was nothing more to say. Even though we didn't yet have a term for it, we decided to accept the fact that something irrevocable had happened that evening. Neither he nor I slept in one another's beds, but when I handed him in our hands, brushed and lingered in the corridor before the lights went out, and for that brief I sensed the contact, the kindness, the silent assurance that I know what we did can never be undone, even though I know no one would comprehend. But as he looked at me, as if I were the only rational thing, and I no longer gave a damn about right or wrong. This isn't simply an error, it's a decision, and I believe I would still make it regardless of what occurs afterward. As you are aware, this is only the beginning, so please subscribe.